So today we are going to be reacting to Thought Slime. Someone who I have gotten requests to look at in the past, and I never have, at least yet. And someone suggested that I look at this video, this particular video, Human Nature and Socialism. And I find this strange because unless I'm mistaken, maybe I made the human nature argument back in a time when I didn't know much better. But I've never made the human nature argument to condemn socialism or defend capitalism. But nevertheless, I guess someone wants me to take a peek at Thought Slime's video about human nature. So let's check this out. And for those who don't know, Thought Slime, I would consider a bread tuber. Ugh. I mean, there's probably no shortage of bread tumors under communism. Bread tuber communist. He calls himself an anarcho-communist, as you'll see. So let's check this out. $12, $13, $14, $15, $16.
In most people's minds.
Oh, he finally says something. It's been 16 seconds before he says anything. And this is a reason why I really have not bothered with this guy, because I don't mean to nitpick, I don't mean to sound petty, but he used a lot of dry and ironic humor where he says something awkward and then pauses for a second. I don't know. I just don't find it amusing. It's annoying.
Anarchy summons up visions of a lawless hellscape where only the strongest and most brutal people can survive.
Well, he's not wrong yet.
Something like The Purge. In fact, the second Purge movie literally has the subtitle, Anarchy. But
Vogger says, calling it right now, there's going to be some package dealing involved. Well, let's see and find out. So, he's presenting Anarchy.
Like The Purge. In fact, the second Purge movie literally has the subtitle, Anarchy. But I don't want that. It's obvious that in a world where only the strong survive, I'd be burned for fuel on day one. How could I want...
Well, also, under anarchy, no one is protecting your right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of property and happiness. And just a reminder, this is a big reason why I, one, avoid the term ANCAP, or as I call it, ANCRAP, anarcho-capitalists, anarcho pieces of crap, because anarchism and capitalism are not compatible. I am a capitalist. I think that government is a necessary good to protect your individual rights and property rights. And secondly, I don't even consider the ANCRAPs, I try to distance myself from those guys as much as possible. I do not consider them allies, even though we might agree on owning the left or whatever it is.
Something so incongruous with my effete soft boy lifestyle. What I want is socialism.
All right, I'm going to speed this up because he talks too slow and has all these pauses. What he wants is socialism, not anarchy.
But like, without a state?
But without a state.
So it'd be mad decentralized. We call this framework anarcho-communism.
Anarcho-communism.
Hey, real quick, here's the definition of socialism I use, so we can be on the same page. Common ownership of the means of production.
Which sounds like a terrible idea. And again, this is the crux of communism. It is the abolition of private property.
Which is to say that the stuff needed to make the stuff needed to survive, so like factories, tools, and farms, and that kind of thing.
Oh, so not personal property like your toothbrush. So this is how they get away with their nonsense. Now, private property is a requirement to live free and pursue values. You have to have the right to use and dispose of your own property, your own material objects as you see fit. But a lot of communists, they try to get around this because when you say, oh, we're going to abolish private property, then people might rightfully respond, well, what about a hairbrush? What about a toothbrush? What about a microwave? What about forks and knives to eat your food with? And what about a bed? What about, people need, then they'll say, well, that's not private property, that's personal property. But even then, it's not really your property, because if the state, if the community can arbitrarily decide what you get to keep and not keep, well, then is it really yours? And I've made a video about this before about how personal property is an anti-concept. And one example you could use is an oven. An oven to cook your own food. They might say, well, an oven is personal property. Obviously, everyone needs an oven in their kitchen so that they can make their own food, cook their own food. So I wonder, say you had an oven under a communist, anarcho-communist society, and you want to use your oven to bake brownies to sell to people to make money. Well, if you start using your property to make money, then you've gone too far, buddy. You can't do that with property. Or say even worse, say you're making brownies and business is booming, and then you decide to hire your neighbor across the street to come wash dishes while you make brownies to make the whole process more efficient. Well, now you're even worse because you're stealing your poor neighbor's labor value. And we can't have that, folks. And so at that point, does your personal property in the kitchen, do those become the means of production? And as you'll see, he's gonna kind of contradict himself on this issue of personal property.
Are owned and controlled by...
But yes, also factories and farms, all property should be privately owned.
Everyone that depends on them, rather than privately owned by whatever ding-dong had the money to buy them. Sounds pretty good, right? But if you ask...
So whatever ding-dong had the money to buy them, that's how this guy thinks of private property.
Centrists and right-wing goofballs about it, oh, it works on paper, but it'll never work in real life.
Except it sounds terrible on paper. It doesn't work on paper, and that's why it does not work in real life. Now, a lot of people, a lot of anti-socialists, anti-communists, so to speak, they do say this dumb notion, they do say this myth that, oh, communism, it's great on paper, it just never works in practice. No, it is a shitty idea on paper, hence why it's always a fucking catastrophe in practice.
There's just one little thought-terminating cliche that prevents socialism from ever working in the real world.
Human nature. I think a lot of people do use the human nature argument. I try to avoid that. I would say that this only works to the extent that the fact that nature has given human beings the capacity to think, the capacity to think conceptually, and use reason to live and survive, because reason is man's basic tool of survival. After all, human beings, we're not strong, we're not fast, you know, we can't swim well, but if we use our mind, then we can make stuff that makes us stronger, makes us more able to survive. Going back to private property, say you own an acre of land and you use your land to grow food on. And now growing food, farming, agriculture, that takes a lot of reason. It takes a lot of study of the stars and the seasons and the patterns so that you can think, so that you can plan long term. Take some science to figure out that you need sun and water, and it starts with the seeds, planting seeds in the ground, and that you need sunlight and water to grow the crops and all that good stuff. So now say you use your property and you use your reason to create corn and apples and beans and watermelon and pumpkins and all that good stuff. Well, if you don't have private property, then any hooligan, any thug can waltz upon your property and take your food. And, well, then it's not your food because, hey, you know, there's no private property. And as you'll see throughout this video, this goofball, Thought Slime, he thinks it's all based on need. You know, you don't have a right to keep the fruits of your labor. You don't have the right to use your property to grow food. You know, how dare you keep all that food? Other people need the food. And it's all based on need. But even when it comes to reason, nature gave humans the capacity to reason, but human beings still need to figure out that they have the capacity to reason and use their reason, and unfortunately, a lot of people don't. That's where philosophy comes in. There's nothing in nature that makes human beings, that teaches human beings, you know, morality, or you know, convinces human beings that you know, reality is knowable. As if you've been paying attention to my recent videos, you'll know.
Attila the Hun, Elizabeth Bathory, Mozart, Andy Dick, Marie Curie, Camus, Tilda Swinton, Napoleon, Octomom, Nelson Mandela, Sonic the Hedgehog, all human. all possessing the same mercurial essence, the unseen, irreducible, inalienable quality of human nature that makes their actions and behaviors exactly the same if you think about it. Socialism can't work because people are simultaneously too greedy and too lazy. That may seem like an oxymoron, but it isn't because... Well, anyway, that's a pretty dim view of humanity. If you ask me, I happen to think...
Well, I would say, again, because human beings have the capacity to reason, that human beings need to use reason to survive and pursue values. That's what makes human beings the best creatures on planet Earth, is the fact that we are able to think conceptually to the point where we can send probes to Mars and dive to the deepest depths of the ocean and grow plentiful amounts of food and raise the standard of living and figure out how to take this black, disgusting sludge known as oil and fossil fuel and turn it into kerosene lighting and fuel to power machines to raise the standard of living. And in order to do that, human beings need to be free from force, from coercion. Otherwise, again, even if you go back to the agricultural revolution, it never gets off the ground if any brute or any thief can waltz around and take your mental productive effort and your physical productive effort.
I think that mutual aid is a factor of evolution. The assumption Wieners make is that socialism is somehow based on everyone sharing stuff with no protections in place if somebody tries to take all this stuff, because it's all based on the honor system, I guess. All this stuff is just put in a big pile. And
now, this is another issue. So, a lot of people, when they talk about economics, they just take for granted that there's a lot of stuff, like guitars and t-shirts. Is that a bowling ball down there? But a lot of this stuff would not exist if it weren't for producers making this stuff in hopes of turning a profit. So, of course, if we ever got socialism, the more Americans embrace socialism, eventually we're going to run out of stuff because no one's going to be producing the stuff. Because why produce stuff if you can't do it for your own self-benefit?
People can come and take whatever they want. So one person could take everything, and everyone else would be hosed. But socialism doesn't just...
But again, it's not because, the lazy and the unproductive will just take all the stuff. No, it's more the fact that the stuff will never get made because people don't have a right to control their own destiny. They don't have a right to use and dispose of their own private property, especially for a personal gain. When you break it all down, what Thought Slime really hates is reason and selfishness.
Must mean everybody sharing
and he eventually admits that he hates selfishness.
Things. It means that if everyone in a community needs something, nobody gets to own it privately.
See, if everyone needs something, then no one gets to own it privately. So if you have an acre, I mean, you never have it under communism, but say you had an acre of land that you were using to grow food. Well, other people need the food, so therefore they have a right to come and take it. And it's no surprise, we're going off on a tangent here. This story came out the other day, the fact that North Korea has been rounding up people's pets due to a national food shortage. And this gets to a concept I want to coin right here. It's what I call the darn mentality. D-A-R-N. Does anybody really need mentality? And you see this a lot with socialists in places like America and more capitalist countries. They usually start with billionaires like Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg. They usually start with billionaires and all the cool stuff that billionaires and rich people tend to own. They ask questions like, does anybody really need $1 billion? Does anybody really need a super yacht? Does anybody really need this? Does anybody really need that? And this is the logical consequence of this mentality. Eventually, people start asking the question, when people start starving because there's a lack of food in the country, people will start asking, does anybody really need to own a dog or a cat or a chinchilla or a gerbil or a bunny rabbit when their neighbor down the street doesn't have enough fucking food to eat? Especially you millennials and you Zoomers at home who think AOC and Bolshevik Bernie Sanders are the bee's knees. This is the logical consequence of their ideas. And if you don't believe me, I want to remind you guys of this. when Bernie Sanders says that people don't need 23 choices of deodorant and 18 choices of sneakers when kids are going hungry. This is what the darn mentality, does anyone really need mentality? That's what it gets you. Eventually, so Bernie Sanders and AOC, most of the time they start with the billionaires. No one really needs $1 billion. And most people are like, yeah, you know, people can get by off of $999 million. Who really needs $1 billion? Does anyone really need a super yacht? Does anyone really need a PlayStation 6? Does anyone really need to own more than 2, 3, 4, or 5 homes? Bernie Sanders does. But Bernie Sanders is already dropping the mask. I mean, this story is from, what, 2015, right here? Eventually, they're gonna, you know, if you're a person that likes footwear, likes fashionable footwear, eventually Bernie Sanders is, eventually that's all gonna go away, because who really needs to spend $50 on a nice new pair of Adidas when your neighbor down the street, they can't afford to go see the doctor, they can't afford to go, yeah, that's where they usually start. We just want free healthcare, we just want tuition-free college. We just want to abolish fossil fuel energy, which, you know, raises the standard of living. No big deal or anything. But eventually, they're going to come after your choice of deodorant. So, ladies, if you like your perfume, eventually you're only going to have one perfume. Eventually, there's only going to be one style of shoes throughout the whole country, because who needs 18 pairs of shoes when so many people are allegedly going hungry? And then once they get through with your deodorant and shoes, then they're going to come after your cats and dogs. Because it's all based on need, folks, not your own happiness, not your selfish interest.
And as a consequence of that, people kind of have to share things. Let's look at a very realistic example I've cooked up.
Very realistic example. Let's see how realistic this is.
My good anarchist brain. Say we have some rich pervert. Let's call him Dave the Capitalist.
Dave the Capitalist.
Because of his inherent rational self-interest.
Inherent rational self-interest. Again, there's nothing inherent about rational self-interest. People have to be taught that they do have reason and that they should use their reason for their own self-interest. But that's not an inherently given idea.
He covets material wealth. In his village, the greatest producer of this wealth is a big fidget spinner factory.
Fidget spinner factory, folks. Fidget spinners. All right, so we're talking about a fidget spinner factory. This is his very, very realistic example.
All the rest of the people in his village need those fidget spinners to soothe their nervous energy.
Oh, people need fidget spinners now. Fidget spinners, which have existed since, what, 1993, I think? I looked it up last night. They've barely existed for 30 years, and now suddenly people have a right. People need fidget spinners to survive, even though human beings have managed to get by without fidget spinners for millennia.
Under capitalism, Dave gets to buy the factory, assuming
Dave gets to buy the factory.
He has the capital to do so.
Of course, this ignores the person who's interested in selling the factory. Do they get to make money? Do they get to sell out if the deal's lucrative enough? This is an issue I had recently when Donald Trump tried to prevent Microsoft from buying TikTok. He might still be doing that. But Microsoft said, yeah, we'll buy the U.S. version, the U.S. company of TikTok, and we'll take control of it so, you know, the Chinese Communist Party doesn't try to use the app to spy on Americans. And Donald Trump still doesn't want to... I think he eventually approved of it, but, you know, he's acting like a total mafia boss with it. But I think Josh Hawley, Missouri Mussolini, he doesn't like the idea of Microsoft buying TikTok. He likes Jesus talk, though. But it's like, why is it any of your business? What if someone thinks it's good? What if someone is willing to sell their company to a higher bidder, like YouTube? YouTube's a classic example of this. YouTube was created by some entrepreneurs who weren't sure if they would be able to finance and take care of their creation long term, withstanding copyright litigation and all that stuff. Not to mention when YouTube came about in 2006, bandwidth and storage was a lot more money. So they sold it to Google for over $1 billion, and Google said, "Hey, we can withstand all of the onslaught of copyright. We can take this over." And now it's a big monopoly. Now everyone has an inherent right to a YouTube channel, or at least that's what, you know, people like perhaps Sargon or Tim Pool would say. Because now it's now it's the public square you got. God, I went off on a long fucking tangent. Anyway, fidget spinner factory. What does he have to say about fidget spinner factories? What's wrong with Dave the capitalist buying a fidget spinner factory?
Then he owns the fidget spinners, and everybody has to pay him to get one. And so
they become as much as $59.99. Dave the capitalist is just going to buy the fidget spinner factory so he can jack up the price of the fidget spinners. Now, keep in mind, as you'll see, Thought Slime thinks we already live under a capitalist hellhole. Which begs a good question. If we're already living under capitalism, then why has this not already happened to fidget spinners? Wouldn't fidget spinners already be, $60? You go on Amazon, you go on Walmart, you can find a variety of different fidget spinners made from a variety of different companies for well under $10. I think I saw one on Amazon, a pack of 5 fidget spinners for $20. Usually find them as a impulse buy at 7-Eleven or Target or wherever. There's no place that sells fidget spinners for more than $10, maybe $15 at the most. So already this is not even close to being a realistic example, but even in this myopic example that he concocted here, even absent of competition, why would Dave the capitalist price it at $60? What person in their right mind, even if it were some rich kid, some rich person, who would spend $60 on a fidget spinner? Dave the capitalist would probably make a lot more money selling thousands, hundreds of thousands of fidget spinners at $10 a piece than he would selling maybe, 5 or 10 at $60 a piece? How is this anywhere close to resembling the real world? It kind of reminds me, this is how Dave the cat, or this is how Thought Slime thinks about capitalism. Oh, it's just going to be, a few greedy people will eventually take over and jack up all the prices. And if you look at the history of capitalism, the best capitalists, the best businessmen have always made it an effort to reduce costs and reduce prices because they know that's how they're going to make the most money. I talked a bit about it in a recent video about Sam Walton, where I mentioned Sam Walton and the fact that he was always trying to cut costs and cut prices. J.D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, Mark Cuban, Bill Gates. Remember Bill Gates? Remember when he got hit up for antitrust? That's another thing missing from this whole example. The fact that under our alleged capitalist system, which is really just a mixed economy, and one example of that is the fact that we have this bullshit law called Sherman Antitrust, which was used against Bill Gates for what? For the crime of giving away free internet browsing software. Bill Gates, if he was guilty of any crime when Microsoft was booming during the 90s, it was the crime of offering products at low prices, free. And we have this goon, this Thought Slime. Oh, well, under capitalism, prices, Dave the capitalist will just buy the fidget spinner factory and raise it to $60. But yeah, it reminds me of this argument I got on a few months ago in one of the comment sections of my videos, where I argued that masses of water like lakes and rivers, they should all be privatized. And the person arguing against me pulled this nonsense, but if someone privately owned lakes, then they would just dump toxic waste into it. And think about that for a second. Think if you own a body of water. Say you own a mile patch of Malibu Beach in California. You own a mile strip of the beach and you own a mile into the Pacific Ocean. What person in their right mind would use that property to start a landfill? Just think it through for a second. If you owned a body of water, if you owned a lake, are you better off using that lake for profitable gains, like selling it in the form of bottled water for consumption, maybe recreational boating, recreational water sports, water parks, beach goers, you're probably going to make a lot more money fishing, not only commercial fishing, but fish farming. You would make a lot more money using a body of water like a lake for recreational and consumption activities than you would dumping garbage and toxic waste into it. Only a moron would think that would be any productive use of a body of water. You know where's a good place to dump garbage? I don't know, maybe the Mojave Desert, which is mostly owned by the federal government, not privately owned. It's barely usable. The Mojave, I think it's what, 130 degrees there this week. Be a great place to dig some holes and dump some garbage into because no one's using that land.
Since they have no other way to self-soothe, he can charge whatever he wants. That's called inelastic demand.
Inelastic demand. Well, the demand can be met if they produce more fidget spinners.
He can bilk the poor fidgety peasants for everything they have and live high off the hog on his fidget throne. Under socialism, Dave doesn't get to keep the factory if everyone else needs it. Sucks for Dave, right? How's he going to feed his capitalist family? Oh wait, it's fine, because all of the things necessary for survival, like farms and shelter, are owned in common. So he has just as much right to food as anyone else, presuming that he shares in the labor of producing it.
Yeah, and there would be a serious lack of food. How did that work out for the Soviet Union and communist China under Mao Zedong? And the Cambodians under Khmer Rouge. How is it working for North Korea right now? Oh, wait a minute. They're having their pets confiscated so that some people can eat. What a wonderful idea this communism is. Anarcho-communism. And that's what a lot of communists will say is they'll say, well, technically none of the so-called so-called communist countries, they never got to real communism because they never evolved into the ideal stateless society that they're supposed to evolve into. And it's like, yeah, because anarchy, a stateless society, is an impossible ideal.
Yeah. But how would the peasants take away the factory? They just walk in and take it because the police and military wouldn't back up Dave's property claims because property claims wouldn't exist. And ideally,
property claims wouldn't exist.
Neither would the police or military.
And he says, ideally, neither would the police or military. So this contradicts his point earlier about my personal property. If we don't have police or military to protect your rights, then why would they protect your rights to your personal property like a toothbrush or a blanket? I mean, do they exist to protect personal property at the very least? Because he says ideally they would be gone, so even your personal property would not be protected.
Socialism doesn't break down if people refuse to share, because you can't hoard things from people if nobody respects or critically defends with force your right to privately own things if other people need them to survive. Human greed isn't a big problem for socialism because the economic system doesn't incentivize it or protect it, but it's a big problem for capitalism though. Oops, 1% of the global population owns 50% of the total wealth on the planet.
So right here he's admitting, or he's saying that, you know, the whole world is capitalism. And, you know, you'll look at the wealth inequality chart. You know, this is a result of capitalism. Okay, well then why aren't fidget spinners $60 then? If capitalism naturally results in fidget spinners costing $60, why are they not $60 yet? Why hasn't Dave the capitalist bought all of the fidget spinner factories? None of this makes any sense. But while we're on the topic of wealth inequality, I should note that wealth inequality is a welcome symptom. I welcome it as a symptom, as a consequence of laissez-faire capitalism, or even the mixed economy. If Bill Gates gets wealthy, if he makes billions of dollars and becomes worth billions of dollars by putting a personal computer and an Xbox in everyone's home, I say wonderful. I mean, I wouldn't know how to do that. I don't care that Bill Gates has more money, that he makes more money, that he's worth more than me. I mean, I would say just on an economic level, he's worth more than me because I probably wouldn't be able to produce as much as Bill Gates has if I were given 10,000 years to live. The guy's a genius. But yeah, it's also worth noting. So they think, communists essentially think that wealth, they think wealth equality is an ideal. Everyone should be relatively equal when it comes to quote-unquote wealth distribution. Right? So I'm not questioning that they don't hate wealth inequality, but I think it's worth noting that when they talk about wealth inequality, all this talk about the 1%, the top 1% owns 50% of the stuff, when they throw those stats out there, they're trying to get you to think of the world from a distorted lens, right? It's kind of like the wage gap myth, the gender wage gap myth. You often hear this stat that women make 77 cents for every dollar a man makes, which technically is a true statistic, but when people say it, what they're trying to put in your mind is this notion that there's rampant wage discrimination amongst genders in the workplace. That when Bob and Sarah, when they go to work the same job at the same company, Sarah gets paid 25, 23, 22% less than Bob does for doing the same job. Except the wage gap statistic, it doesn't compare apples to apples like that. They just take the average wage of all women and compare it to the average wage of all men, not factoring in the jobs worked, the hours worked, the skill of the job, and all that stuff. So it's a completely useless statistic. But when they throw it out there, they want you to think that there's rampant wage discrimination. It's kind of like when people talk about wealth inequality. They want you to think, when they say the top 1% owns 50% of the wealth, they want you to think that it's just a handful of shady guys in suits in some smoke-filled back room in some, ominous lair somewhere like Cobra Commander or the Legion of Doom. And they're just, they own 50% of the land and the water and the metals and the gold and the money. They just own 50% of all the stuff on the planet. And they're secretly controlling it. But as I've pointed out, 1%, think about that, 1% of the United States alone is 3 million people. So are you telling me that 3 million people are secretly plotting in a back room somewhere trying to control it? No, it's probably just happens to be 3 million individuals who are really productive and have invested their time and money well to the point where they own and have a lot of wealth. Or they have a high net worth because of the stock they own in the company that they work for or started, like Jeff Bezos. When people talk about Jeff Bezos, oh, he's worth $200 billion. Oh, no. Well, it's not like he has $200 billion worth of land or $200 billion worth of gold somewhere in a vault. It's mostly tied up in his ownership of Amazon shares. Amazon, which is a company that he created. It's very dishonest when they throw this around. Not that it's untrue, but they throw it out there in hopes that you're going to think of the rich, of people like Jeff Bezos in a nefarious way, so to speak. And I think another good example of this is Apple Computers. Apple Computers was worth a lot in the 1980s. It was booming. They were dominating the personal computer industry. Then Steve Jobs gets the boot, and Apple falls off a cliff. They almost I think they were on the verge of bankruptcy in the 1990s. They bring back Steve Jobs, and because of Steve Jobs' brilliant vision, because of his vision, Apple became the most valuable country, if not one of the most valuable countries in the world, because they started making products like laptops and phones and iPads and tablets and all that stuff that millions of people are happily forking their hard-earned money in exchange for. But it's not like Apple owns, $1 trillion worth of land. Again, that's a lot of that stuff is owned by the federal government, which few people make a fuss about. The federal government owns, I think, 600. Going back to my rant about the Mojave Desert, federal government owns 600 million acres of land in the United States, in the West Coast, west of the Mississippi, and throughout Alaska. And often it's not put to productive use. It's not, whenever, I think there was a story recently about how the Trump administration wants to open parts of Alaska up for oil drilling, and everyone's freaking out. Oh no, what about the polar bears? Well, what about the people who need cheaper energy? What about them? People be too lazy.
A lot of the jobs people do now would be completely irrelevant in an...
A lot of the jobs that people do now would be completely irrelevant in an ANCOM society. What jobs would be irrelevant? By the way, who is he to say which jobs would be and not be irrelevant? I mean, in a free market, People would decide with their own dollar and their own wallet and their own checkbook which jobs are relevant and useful or not.
And calm society. We wouldn't need anyone to work in advertising.
No one. What's irrelevant about advertising? I mean, I like advertising. Advertising subsidizes a lot of entertainment traditionally. Subsidizes the Super Bowl. Subsidizes YouTube, obviously. Now, he does have a point. If under communism, because there would be no private companies, there would be a lack of private property. Yeah, no one would have anything to advertise because no one would be competing for money. Everything would just be publicly owned or run by the state. So yeah, there would be a lack of advertising because why does your local food store need to compete for your dollar when there's no fucking competition? So I guess he's right in a sense. But in a free market, I don't have a problem with advertising. I like it that companies try to compete for my dollar through funny and clever ads. They're letting me know that they might have a product that might help improve my life. Like Coca-Cola. Who doesn't like the Coca-Cola polar bears? Who doesn't like Coca-Cola? A lot of their advertisements. Or what about Old Spice? Those Terry Crews commercials. I started buying Old Spice because of those Terry Crews commercials. I'm like, I want to see more of this.
Or finance.
Or finance. Finance would be irrelevant. Finance would be irrelevant. Now, again, in a sense, he's right. Because under communism, why would you bother trying to invest in stuff when it can just get seized and taken over by a bunch of mindless thug hooligans? But notice his contempt for finance. Finance, when you break it down, is ultimately the profession of allocating money to the best productive use. It ultimately, it's ultimately an attack. The hatred of finance is ultimately an attack on reason and long-term planning, because that's what finance requires. It requires a lot of thinking and long-term planning. But also, I think even more importantly, finance is a very selfish profession because it often requires one party lending out money that they have to another party that quote-unquote needs it and expecting a greater return on the principal. And that's ultimately the contempt for finance, whether it's, the mystic religions like Christianity and Islam that view usury as a sin, but also amongst left-wing knuckleheads like Thought Slime. It's just selfish. When someone has a lot of money that they don't need to consume right away, you see this on Shark Tank all the time. I mean, Kevin O'Leary, he's really explicit about it. This is why Kevin O'Leary is my favorite shark on Shark Tank. He is very explicit about the fact. He's like, if I'm giving you my money, if I'm investing in your company, then I want to make money. This isn't a charity, right? Shark Tank. Or if you're buying a house, whenever you buy a house, apply for a mortgage or even a car loan, most lenders want you to prove that you have a reliable source of income. When people lend you money, they are betting on the fact that you are going to be productive long term to the point where the money that they are paying back is a rather minor, if not at least an affordable inconvenience. And it's a win-win transaction. The person who has the money isn't going to be consuming the money right away. They can give it to someone who can put that money to productive use and pay back and give a greater return on the investment. And there's nothing wrong with that. But people who hate selfishness think that there's something wrong with that because it is, in fact, very selfish. That's why, again, I get a lot of comments on my whole Ben Shapiro video about how, because he says, oh, capitalism is really forced altruism. Well, if altruism is good, then you would naturally be opposed to finance because finance is a very selfish profession, and rightfully so.
Wouldn't need managers, middle managers.
No managers.
Presidents, vice presidents, executives, account managers, brand specialists, thought leaders, lobbyists.
Oh, yeah, but going back to finance is a win-win transaction Because the person that needs the money, they otherwise wouldn't have gotten the money, and they've gotten an opportunity to be more productive than they otherwise would have been, and they're likely going to enrich themselves in the process, even if it's something as simple as a house mortgage. You know, after you're done paying off the house, now you own the land and the building that you otherwise would never have been able to afford on your own without someone lending you the money. And the person that lent you the money probably got twice as much money back in return after, say, 15 or 30 years. Win-win. When someone lends you money, when you pay the interest, what you are paying them for delayed gratification. Because once they give you the money, that money is presumably consumed right away, especially when it comes to a house or a car loan. But even when it comes to a business loan, that money's probably going to go to paying workers to, you know, build a train track or build a skyscraper or operate a factory or whatever it is.
Or any of the other parasites that capitalism makes essential nowadays. A lot of jobs just straight up don't need to be done at all.
A lot of jobs don't need to be done at all. Could you imagine this guy deciding which jobs are essential and not essential? I mean, this guy clearly has a central planning philosopher king mentality. Oh, well, some jobs just don't need to exist. Of course, you see that play out over the last few months with this new concept, essential worker. Who gets to decide which workers are essential or not? What, a government bureaucrat? Who, unironically enough, I can't think of any less essential worker than a fucking government bureaucrat.
Oh. David Graeber writes about what he calls bullshit jobs. Quote, in the year 1930, John Maynard Keynes predicted that by the century's end, technology would have advanced sufficiently that countries like Great Britain or the United States would have achieved a 15-hour work week. There's every reason to believe he was right. In technological terms, we are quite capable of this. And yet, it didn't happen. Instead, technology has been...
Well, what if people want to work more than 15 hours a day? And, you know, they find it in their self-interest to be really productive, use their time productively. You know, and say we did get to a point where, okay, you don't have to work 40 hours to sustain your living and you have an abundance of free time. I mean, what would you do with all that free time if you only had to work 15 hours a week at a job to sustain your standard of living? I mean, would you just sit around and play video games all day? Would you try to build anything? Would you try to create stuff?
Been marshaled, if anything, to figure out ways to make us all work more. In order to achieve this, jobs have had to be created that are effectively pointless. Huge swaths of people in Europe and North America in particular.
By what standard are they pointless?
Spend their entire working lives performing tasks they secretly believe do not really need to be performed. The moral and spiritual damage that comes from this situation is profound.
I mean, if two parties, you know, a lot of people might see, I don't know, video games as unessential. Again, this goes back to the darn mentality. Does anybody really need to play video games when they could be using their time, I don't know, volunteering at a soup kitchen or whatever, or digging in some farm to raise the crop yield for society? But what if I want to? What if I'm willing to pay money to a programmer to make a video game for me for my own enjoyment? It's completely arbitrary.
It is a scar across our collective soul. End quote.
Again, let people decide with their own dollar and wallet. Let people decide in a free society which jobs are useful or useless or not.
There's a whole lot of human energy that can
and some people might spend their money employing people for useless tasks, like, I don't know, like pseudoscience doctors or whatever. I'm trying to think of a good example. I don't know. You guys get the point.
Be redirected to more useful purposes. And that's not even touching people who want to work and be productive, but can't find it.
It's kind of like that Monty Python skit, like where the guy goes to pay someone to have an argument. I mean, I would see that as a useful job, just paying someone to argue with me. Although I guess people do that. You know, they pay to host debates. But I don't need to pay someone to argue with me.
Job, or the idle rich, who literally do nothing.
The rich do nothing.
But granted, there are a lot of jobs that are difficult and require specialized training. Here's the thing, though. I really don't want those jobs being done by people who are just cashing a check.
We're just cashing a check? Why not? I mean, cashing a check that comes with a job. I mean, that's the purpose of most jobs. Sure, you would like people to have a passion for the job that they do, and I hope people, but there are always going to be jobs that people work that they don't really have a passion for, and they're just there to collect a paycheck. They're mainly there because the job is paying them a lot of money to do the meaningless, not meaningless, but the mind-numbing task or the difficult work. Often that's what incentivizes. It kind of reminds me back in 2015. During the big oil boom in North Dakota, I went to Dickinson, North Dakota, where there was a big oil boom. And the oil industry was booming so hard, and there were so many six-figure jobs just going out that they created a labor shortage amongst low-skilled workers. Fast food restaurants all over the place were hiring entry-level positions. Places like McDonald's and Taco Bell, they were offering entry-level positions at $17 an hour. Now, most people wouldn't really want to work at McDonald's. Most people don't really see McDonald's as like, maybe a full-time career. But there might be a lot of people who are kind of sitting on their ass playing video games, teenagers, and then suddenly McDonald's says, here, come work for us. We'll give you $17 an hour. They're probably not going to be passionate about serving French fries through a drive-thru, but they might be passionate about making a lot of money. And they might find that a better use of their time than playing Xbox all day. What's the problem?
Want my doctor to genuinely care about my health and be passionate about learning and practicing medicine. There are probably a lot of very caring, intelligent, and fastidious people who can't become doctors under capitalism because they can't afford the training.
They can't afford the training. Well, maybe that has something to do with the fact that education, especially higher education, is largely controlled and subsidized by the government through student loans, and we've encouraged many people who probably shouldn't or have no business going to college, at least right away. Just go to college, you'll figure it out. Having education is everything. Education is the future. Oh, it doesn't matter what you study. And it's all a result of government-backed student loans. So more people are going to college, which by virtue of supply and demand drives up the costs for people like potential doctors who really need to go to college. Well, now they're competing with student loans and seats in a lecture hall and place and beds in a dorm room with people who are, spending ungodly amounts of money, not even sure what the fuck they want to study yet. So can we really blame this on capitalism? Not to mention the fact that, contrary to popular belief, the medical industry in America is still heavily regulated and subsidized, which makes becoming a doctor more difficult, makes work and life for doctors more difficult with the more regulations they got to deal with. I think I've heard somewhere that like a significant cost for clinics and private practices are paying staff to deal with all the regulatory nonsense. I mean, shit, whenever you go to a doctor's office, if you ever go and see a new doctor, you have to sign a bunch of legal paperwork and all that stuff. Either way, I don't think it's fair to just blame it all on capitalism. It's clearly government intervention in both education and healthcare. But also, this goes back to the issue of private property. He says he wants people to be passionate about the profession that they pursue. What if someone's passionate about farming? What if someone's passionate about operating a factory? Shouldn't they have a right to own the factory that they run? If someone is passionate about manufacturing to the point where they want to open their own factory because they think they can do it better and more efficiently, well, this goof wants to make it illegal because, hey, how dare you have private property? Say someone's passionate about farming, about raising cattle, and they want to do it. They have a better way of doing it. But, hey, they can't own a farm because private property has been abolished. Isn't that wonderful, folks?
And just imagine the way specialized fields could be revolutionized if everyone with the necessary drive and talent was able to participate in those fields, and those without those qualities didn't feel compelled.
Unless you want to open a factory or have your own farm.
To participate in them and junk everything up just to get a paycheck. Every doctor that's ever pushed pills on you because they had a sweetheart deal with the manufacturer. Every therapist who's ever stalled to bill more hours. Every lawyer who defends Exxon Valdez when they have an oil spill. Every cab driver who took the long way to your destination.
Oh no, cab drivers. They're taking the long way to their... Is this guy never taken an Uber? Taking an Uber where the customer, they can look on the phone where the destination is and whether or not the driver is on a good path. Of course, now Uber and Lyft are being chased out of California from wannabe central planners like Javier Becerra and Gavin Newsom and Lorena Gonzalez.
Every salesperson who tried to push a useless extended warranty. They all did it because the point of their job is to make money, not to help people, not to service human need. But what about crappy jobs? Well, I guarantee for literally every job, no matter how difficult, dangerous, or disgusting, there are passionate people who genuinely want to do it, and plenty of competent people who would be willing to do it if it needed to get done. And sure, maybe you say, not me, I'll just sit around playing video games. You cannot do the labor necessary to have everything you need to live a life of leisure playing video games on your own. You can't. Making your own food alone would be so much effort that you wouldn't have much time left over to research how to solar power your Xbox.
So yeah, why not just pay someone who's really good at making food so that I can have more leisure time? What a brilliant concept.
At some point, you're going to require someone else's help. And why would people give it to you if you're not willing to help others when they need it?
Oh, so what? This guy thinks he can just run shit out? Let's play that back again.
That you wouldn't have much time left over to research how to solar power your Xbox. At some point, you're going to require someone else's help. And why would people give it to you if you're not willing to help others when they need it?
So does this guy think that society can just run on emotional currency? So he's talking about dirty jobs. Yeah, if I need someone to fix my leaky toilet, here's an idea. I just pay them to come fix my leaky toilet. Why would a plumber want to help you out if you're not going to help out others? Who would want to live in that fucking world? I'd rather just pay the plumber to come fix my place, my pipes, and then leave. I don't have to be friends with the plumber. I don't want to have to prove that I'm helping society so that they can come unclog my sink.
But if everyone works just a little bit, we can all blow the rest of the time doing anything we want to do.
If everyone just works a little bit.
You could spend a lot of time playing video games. Or you could stay the course in capitalism, generating endless reports that nobody reads to justify the salary.
And of course, without capitalism, there would be no video games. But what about Tetris? Yeah, what about Tetris? Guys, your PlayStation 6s and your Nintendo Switches and they would not exist if it weren't for large corporations like Sony, Nintendo, and Microsoft trying to find ways to maximize profits for their shareholders. That's just a fact.
That you need to pay rent to your landlord, who literally does nothing but sit on their butt and collect checks from you.
Oh yeah, landlords, they just sit on their butt. This guy would never, this guy wouldn't last a week landlording. Just a reminder, landlord rights are human rights.
Yes, I guess. Ultimately, I can't prove what human nature is. I can't prove people are fundamentally good or hardworking, but even if we weren't...
you call it sit around playing video games. 8-Bit Beard says in the chat, you sit around playing video games and make money. It's called Twitch. And who's to thank for that? It's the greediest capitalist in the world today, Jeff Bezos, because Twitch is owned by Amazon.
I think it's worth challenging the assumption that the way people behave now is in...
Now, some people might say, like, oh, Thought Slime is a hypocrite because he wouldn't have his YouTube channel, he wouldn't have his video games without capitalism. And I get the sense, I'm just speculating, but I'm willing to bet that he'd be willing to throw all of that in the garbage, his YouTube channel and his video games. He's probably willing to sacrifice all of that if people like Jeff Bezos get their heads cut off.
Tractable and unchangeable. I don't believe there's such thing as human nature. We're flexible animals. Human beings are really, really good at adapting to new ways.
Yeah, we're really good at using our mind to adapt and increase the standard of living. But people are only allowed to do that if they have at least some semblance of property rights. But they need private property in order to use their mind to adapt.
Doing things.
How can you adapt when hooligans can just take your fucking stuff and the productive effort of your mind?
We need to get better at the reverse, adapting the way we do things to be better for human beings. We're good enough...
Right, we need more capitalism.
...to live in a better world. We need to fix the mess that capitalism has made of our lives. We can fix it, and we will fix it, because humans have the capacity to be compassionate and hardworking. And compassion and hard work are all that is required.
Compassion and hard work is all... You hearing this, folks? It's all about compassion and hard work, not reason, not thinking.
If you think humanity is defined by selfishness and cruelty, let me ask you...
Selfishness and cruelty. There you go. That's what he has a problem with. Selfishness and cruelty. It's no surprise that this guy hates professions like finance, because he thinks it's all about compassion and hard work, not reason, not long-term planning, not trying to find the best ways, the most productive ways to allocate capital.
See this. If people are so fundamentally crooked that they cannot be trusted with freedom because they will abuse it, how can they be trusted with authority over someone else?
He makes a pretty good point here. Let's replay that. In fact, I'm going to slow it down. Let's hear that again.
Compassion and hard work are all that is required. If you think humanity is defined by selfishness and cruelty, let me ask you this. If people are so fundamentally crooked that they cannot be trusted with freedom because they will abuse it...
That's a good point. When you accept that selfishness is bad, then you can't defend capitalism, because you think because selfishness is bad, and if you just let people be free, and if people are naturally selfish, then we can't trust them to be free, because then everyone will be Dave the capitalist, and they'll just buy up all the factories and try to squeeze everyone. And that's why the real battle here is epistemology and ethics. Your mind is your basic tool of survival to make decisions, to use your mind to make your life better, to survive and pursue values. And selfishness is the standard of morality. That life is finite, everyone's mortal, and you should, and if you only have so much time on this planet, you should be trying to maximize your own life and maximize your own happiness. Who wants to live when the standard for good is dying on a cross for the sake of sinners and savages? This is the morality that Thought Slime has embraced. And that's a good question. Because if your whole view of humanity is everyone is corrupt and cruel and selfish, even though selfishness is good, if everyone is corrupt and cruel, then people can't be trusted to live free. So we need philosopher kings to make sure everyone stays in line.
How can they be trusted with authority over someone else?
And that's all he has to say. So again, just a reminder to everyone out there, the real battle is epistemology and ethics. Because again, if your view of humanity, this is a problem with, this is a big reason why Christian conservatives, even though they say they like capitalism, they try to own the left, oh, we're all about capitalism. This is where they fall short, because they think humans are guilty of things like original sin, that human beings, you see this a lot from mainstream conservative commentators, that human beings are inherently depraved. Well, if that's the case, how can they be trusted with freedom? In order to defend capitalism, you have to embrace reason and self-interest.